The soybean belt of North America was once America's fortress. Endless rows of green across Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska guaranteed not just food, but global power. China bought, farmers thrived, and Washington boasted of dominance. That era is gone. In 2025, contracts have collapsed. Shipments that once sailed from New Orleans now depart from Vancouver and Santos. Canadian farmers are signing deals once unimaginable. Brazil is flooding Asia with supply, and American exports are left stranded. Prices have tumbled, subsidies are promised, but futures contracts tell the truth. U.S. soybeans are no longer the first choice. In Ottawa, the celebration is quiet but confident. In Washington, the response is anger, demands, and threats. And in the heartland, farmers are staring at empty order books. So we ask, is this the moment America's agricultural empire falls and Canada steps into the vacuum? For decades, soybeans anchored the economic bridge between North America and Asia. The United States, with its sprawling fields and sophisticated logistics, delivered consistency. Barges floated down the Mississippi, rail cars snaked toward the Gulf, and massive ships carried U.S. soybeans to ports across China, Japan, and South Korea. The Midwest farmer was not just a producer, he was a quiet diplomat, sustaining the world's food chain and securing America's trade leverage. Canada, meanwhile, stood in the background, smaller acreage, modest volumes, and little claim to Asia's commanding contracts. Stability seemed permanent. Then came the rupture. The U.S.-China trade war weaponized soybeans, eroding trust. Tariffs slashed U.S. competitiveness overnight. Climate shocks, from drought in the plains to floods along the Mississippi, piled on pressure. And while Washington sparred with Beijing, Ottawa invested. Canada expanded port capacity, built rail efficiency, and marketed reliability. What was once America's undisputed market began fragmenting. Suddenly, the unthinkable happened. Canadian soybeans were no longer a footnote. They were a headline. Washington's soybean story is one of self-inflicted wounds. Under Donald Trump, tariffs became the hammer, and China was the nail. In a bid to flex muscle, the administration imposed sweeping duties. Predictably, Beijing retaliated, targeting the Midwest's lifeblood, soybeans. The numbers are staggering. Once, China absorbed nearly 60% of U.S. soybean exports. By the 2023-24 marketing year, that figure had collapsed to just 22%. What was once the crown jewel of U.S. agriculture turned into collateral damage in a geopolitical fight. The political solution? Subsidies. A $60 billion 10-year bailout plan was unveiled, packaged as salvation for struggling farmers. But on the ground, resentment brewed. Large agribusiness corporations absorbed the lion's share, while family farmers, the heart of the soybean belt, complained of being left behind. Trump's public demand on August 10th for China to quadruple its soybean purchases was met with silence in Beijing. By then, China had already built secure supply chains through Brazil and Canada. The financial toll is unmistakable. In midsummer 2025, futures prices slid from $10.36 to $9.84 per bushel. A 50-cent drop may sound small, but for farmers buried in loans and battling rising input costs, it meant red ink across balance sheets. Across Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska, the talk isn't about growth, it's about survival. Washington's bluster may fire up rallies, but it has left farmers facing one of the bleakest harvest seasons in decades. Canada's rise in the soybean trade has been hailed as a breakthrough, proof that a smaller player can capitalize on a neighbor's missteps. In Ontario's Essex County, farmers who once felt overshadowed by their American counterparts now speak of record contracts with buyers in Shanghai and Seoul. Grain elevators that used to sit half full are brimming, and long trains snake toward Vancouver, carrying soybeans to ports once dominated by U.S. shipments. For many growers, this moment feels like vindication. But success carries hidden costs. Infrastructure is showing cracks under the pressure. At Vancouver's port, container congestion has become routine, forcing delays and driving up storage costs. CN Rail has warned that demand is pushing its network toward capacity, raising fears of a logistical bottleneck during peak harvest. Farmers may have more buyers, but they also face rising fertilizer bills, escalating transportation costs, and uncertainty about whether the system can handle the boom. Then there is the geopolitical shadow. By leaning so heavily on China, Canada risks walking into the same trap that ensnared the US. A single political dispute, like the 2019 canola ban, could freeze contracts overnight. Ottawa may celebrate its success, but growers on the ground know that they are living on borrowed stability. Canada's soybean boom, while real, is also perilously dependent on forces far beyond its control. Across the Midwest, the story is not one of triumph, but of erosion. In Iowa and Illinois, where soybeans are as much a cultural marker as an economic one, farmers are confronting an existential crisis. Futures prices falling below $10 per bushel have gutted profitability. For growers already carrying high debt from machinery and land, the math simply doesn't work. The human toll is stark. In Greene County, Iowa, a farmer who once shipped thousands of bushels to China now struggles to find reliable buyers. Credit has tightened, foreclosure notices are rising, and in towns that rely on agriculture as their backbone, cafes and supply stores echo with quiet despair. The $60 billion subsidy package touted in Washington does little to calm nerves. Family farms argue that corporate giants swallow most of the aid, leaving small producers with scraps. The refrain is bitter but common. We don't want subsidies, we want markets. The pain stretches well beyond the farm gate. Soybeans are a pillar of multiple industries. They feed livestock, fuel biodiesel, and stabilize rural economies. As exports collapse, meat packers face higher feed costs. Fuel refiners face supply gaps, and consumers absorb the shock in rising grocery bills. Inflationary ripples spread far from the Midwest, hitting families already grappling with cost of living spikes. For the US, the irony is heavy. The world's former soybean titan is subsidizing its farmers just to survive, while rivals expand their reach. Farmers feel abandoned, not just by markets, but by policies that turned their livelihoods into pawns in a larger political war. America's cost is not only economic, it is generational. Young farmers see no future, and communities built on soybeans now wonder whether their defining crop has a place in tomorrow's global economy. Soybeans have become the stage on which North America's deepest trade dilemmas are playing out. The United States, once the undisputed heavyweight, is bleeding market share, while farmers cling to subsidies instead of contracts. Canada, once a quiet participant, now basks in newfound influence, but at the cost of tethering its fortunes to a single, unpredictable buyer. Both countries are locked in a paradox, competing fiercely in Asia, yet bound together by geography, supply chains, and shared vulnerability to global shocks. This is more than a crop dispute. It's a test of resilience, diplomacy, and foresight in an era when food is politics and politics is survival. The question is no longer who wins the next harvest, but who can endure the next storm. Like, comment, and subscribe for more.